Hello, my name is William Della Costa, and this is my final project on criminal investigation. My first slide is about the various types of criminal technology. One type is digital photography, which allows recordings at crime scenes and detailed captures of evidence. The next one is fingerprinting. This allows investigators to find and locate criminals who leave fingerprints at a crime scene, which is pretty easy to do because criminals usually leave a small trace of evidence each time. But it does need to be handled with care because fingerprinting can be very fragile evidence. The next slide is the importance of police records. They can be used as evidence when someone is on trial, and they are also important because they represent the final procedure of an investigator's efforts. The next slide is the necessity of marking and preserving evidence. It provides proper identification when you mark your evidence, which is later used by the officer who marked it in the first place at a trial. It's very common for that to happen. And they usually have to include certain things like the date and the time when the evidence was seized. And they usually have to have the name of the suspect and usually the officer who took the evidence in the first place. It's also important to preserve evidence because it's crucial that it remains viable whenever it is needed to be presented, because if it gets tampered with, destroyed, or just anything happens to it, then it can't really be used. Investigative techniques is my next slide, which one of them is undercover operations, which allows investigators to get information that would be impossible to obtain by normal methods. And it's an easy way to gain the trust of organizations to provide valuable information to officers. The next one is analyzing information. This allows investigators to organize any fragmented information, and this can happen a lot because police officers or investigators in general can get their sources from different people, and sometimes it can be a little hectic. So being able to organize it and manage it properly is important. Next is the importance of crime scene protection. Any unauthorized individuals can possibly destroy any evidence, which can lead to the evidence becoming completely useless. Anyone cannot come onto a crime scene if it's not protected properly. It can even be the criminal themselves who caused it, trying to cover their tracks. So it's very important to preserve anything and make sure nothing happens to the possible evidence at the crime scene. Next is the steps of the preliminary investigation. The first thing the first responding officer needs to do at the scene is to secure the crime scene. Next, they need to look for a possible arrest of a suspect. Even though the crime already happened, the person who caused it may still be there, so it's important to keep an eye out for them. Next, even if the suspect isn't there and the officer has no clue what happened, there might be a witness who actually saw the whole crime occur, so it's very important to locate the witness. Next, the officer has to document what happened, because it's important to keep a record of the events that happened. And the last thing they need to do is to begin searching and collecting evidence. Alright. The next slide is on lab techniques. One of the first techniques is through DNA analysis, which uses serological techniques to characterize any bodily fluids. This can be anything ranging from blood, semen, and even saliva. The next thing to talk about is ballistics, which compares bullets and ammunition components to see if they have any association with each other. Next is forensic photography, which uses traditional silver-based processes and digital imaging to produce and analyze any given images. My next slide is about evidence at court proceeding. Evidence is material that allows someone to prove or disprove a fact. And it's important to have this because let's say you're a prosecutor and you can't just say that the defendant you're against is guilty, that he's a murderer. You need to prove with incriminating evidence that this man is guilty. Alright. The next evidence is the principles of proper criminal interrogation techniques. One thing to know is there needs to be two interrogators during an interrogation. One for questioning the suspect themselves, and the other as a witness for any statement given by said suspect. The next thing you also need to know is investigators are prohibited from using coercion or duress. And this means they can't use any sort of physical force or threats against the suspect. So a good example would be is if you're interrogating someone and you pointed a gun to their head and say, "You have to tell me everything you know." You can't do that. It's against the United States Constitution. And during common law, doing these things were possible. They were pretty much like anything goes just to get the information out. But nowadays in the US Constitution, you're not able to do anything like that. Alright. Thank you. This is my presentation, and have a good day.